Welcome back to True Echo, where we bring you the stories the world tried to silence. Stories of redemption, justice, and voices that refuse to stay quiet. Today's story will leave you stunned, inspired, and deeply moved. It's the story of a woman forgotten by the world, but never by the music that lived inside her. Stay with us to the end because this is one performance the world will never forget. Did I ask you to touch that piano? The voice cracked like a whip across the high-ceilinged auditorium. Naomi's hand froze mid-motion, a soft cloth still dangling from her fingers. She hadn't even played. Just brushed away a fingerprint. A smudge on the Steinway's polished lid. But the sound of Mr. Halbridge's voice, cold, biting, full of condescension, made it feel like she had broken something sacred. She straightened, quietly folding the cloth into her apron. "I wasn't playing, sir. Just wiping." "You weren't asked to clean it either," he snapped. "That instrument costs more than your salary. Your job is the floors. Stick to them." Several students looked on, half smirking, half averting their eyes. No one stood up for her. No one ever did. To them she was just the janitor. The woman in worn sneakers and a maintenance badge. Invisible, until she became inconvenient. Naomi didn't argue. She never did. She slipped behind the velvet curtain and vanished into the shadows of the backstage corridor, her cart squeaking along like a ghost returning to its hiding place. She didn't cry. She never cried. Not there. Not anymore. But the ache in her chest wasn't from shame. It was from memory. From a time before her hands scrubbed stairwells and mopped up the footsteps of others. A time when those same hands had made music soar. A time when she was more than what people saw. That evening, long after everyone had left and the last echoes of rehearsal faded into silence, Naomi returned. Not to clean. Not to relive humiliation. But to remember. The auditorium was still. Moonlight poured through the high windows. The Steinway waited as if untouched since morning. Naomi didn't rush. She moved like someone touching a photograph of a lost loved one, tentative, reverent. She sat down. Her hands hovered, not with uncertainty but restraint. The keys weren't just ivory. They were memory, sacrifice, longing. She pressed one. Then another. Then the notes formed a phrase, a lullaby, one she had written at 17 when her dream was Juilliard, not janitorial work. What she didn't know was that she wasn't alone. Behind the curtain, Leah Carter, 15, red ponytail wild as ever, listened. Her breath caught. Naomi wasn't playing like a custodian stealing a moment. She was playing like someone who had bled for music, someone whose soul was stitched to the rhythm of keys. Leah didn't mean to record it. But she did. And the world was about to hear what the Academy had long ignored. Leah didn't sleep that night. Not because of nerves or an unfinished theory assignment, but because of the melody she had captured on her phone, a melody that made her forget where she was, who she was, even that she was recording. It was haunting and raw. Not polished like the performances drilled into her by teachers like Halbridge. No, this was something else. Something more human. More real. By morning, Leah had edited the video down to just under 4 minutes. No face, no name. Just the title, The Hidden Genius of the Janitor. Listen until the end. She uploaded it anonymously and left for school. Within hours, her phone vibrated with hundreds of notifications. By lunchtime, thousands. By the time she got to theory class, it had over 200,000 views. Comments poured in, musicians, teachers, even verified accounts asking who the woman was. Some guessed she was a retired prodigy. Others said it was fake. One even claimed it sounded like Clara Has Kill Reborn. But no one, dismissed the playing. Except Halbridge. He overheard students whispering about the video and scoffed. "Internet junk," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "Anyone can sound good with the right filters." But later that afternoon, the headmaster called him into her office. "Philip," she said sharply, pushing her glasses up her nose, "have you seen this?" She turned her laptop to face him. The video played. Naomi's fingers danced across the keys, the audio unfiltered, the acoustics unmistakable. His mouth tightened. His jaw twitched. "That video needs to come down," he said stiffly. The headmaster raised a brow. "It's too late. It's gone viral. We've received inquiries from Juilliard, from Carnegie Hall, even the BBC. They all want to know who she is." He swallowed. "She's our janitor." The headmaster leaned back in her chair. "Is she?" Naomi had no idea any of this was happening. She arrived at work early as always, bucket and mop in hand. She cleaned baseboards, wiped down railings, and emptied bins. Her phone was an ancient flip model. It didn't buzz with updates. She lived in a world without likes, retweets, or shares. But she noticed the looks. Students stared longer. A few nodded politely. One even offered to help carry her cart down the stairs. It was subtle, but different. By Tuesday morning, the difference became undeniable. She was scrubbing scuff marks near the faculty lounge when the headmaster appeared. "Miss Williams," she said. Naomi stood quickly, confused. "Yes, ma'am? Would you step into my office?" Naomi followed, dread thick in her throat. She thought maybe she'd left a bucket somewhere or broken a code of conduct. She sat gingerly across from the headmaster's oak desk. "Have you seen this?" the headmaster asked, turning her monitor toward Naomi. The video played. Naomi's eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth. I didn't know. I didn't mean." The headmaster raised her hand, silencing the panic. "You don't have to explain, Miss Williams. It's beautiful." Naomi blinked. "I wasn't trying to show off. I was just remembering." "Well," the headmaster said, lifting a manila folder, "the world remembered too. That video has over 8 million views. And we'd like you to headline the spring honors recital." Naomi stared. "You want me to play?" "Yes." Naomi laughed, a low, disbelieving sound. "You've had me mopping this place for 10 years. The headmaster's cheeks flushed. "Sometimes institutions forget what they're meant for. But that doesn't mean we can't change." Naomi looked down at her hands. They trembled. "I don't know if I can do it anymore." "You have full access to the recital hall," the headmaster said softly. "Every night. No restrictions. Take the time you need." Naomi stood, quietly stunned. She nodded once and left the room. Outside, as she walked the halls, students stepped aside. Some smiled. One clapped softly. And for the first time in years, Naomi walked a little taller. That night she didn't clean. She played. She pulled out an old, worn piece of sheet music, her own composition. One she'd never shown anyone. It had no title. She called it The Piece That Waited. She sat at the Steinway under the moonlit skylight and let her fingers find their truth again. Her soul spilled into the notes. What she didn't know was that the security guard had started listening. And he wasn't alone. Tomorrow, Naomi's music would reach even further. The next night, Naomi returned to the auditorium with a small thermos of tea and a handwritten copy of The Piece That Waited tucked gently into her coat pocket. She moved slowly, not from age but from something deeper, heavier. The weight of possibility. The terror of hope. She didn't know if the music would come again. She only knew it had to try. The auditorium was silent, hushed like a cathedral. The Steinway stood under a moonbeam, dignified and expectant. Naomi ran her fingers along the lid as if greeting an old friend. Then she sat, placed the sheet music before her and began to play. But this time she wasn't alone. In the shadows of the balcony, nestled between velvet seats, a dozen students sat quietly. Leah had told them, not about the video, but about Naomi. The real Naomi. The one who didn't need fanfare or staging. The one who bled music from the soul, not the syllabus. They didn't record this time. They didn't dare. They listened. Naomi's piece was unlike anything they had heard. Not classical, not modern, not jazz or minimalist. It was human. The first few measures were slow, trembling with restraint. Then it swelled, bold and soaring, modulating through unexpected keys like memories crashing into each other. The room held its breath. And when she reached the final note, a single tear slipped down Naomi's cheek. She stood, ready to leave, ready to disappear again. That's when she saw them. The students didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just stood. Silent, reverent, eyes wide with something between awe and apology. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't need to. She gave them a single nod and walked off stage. But this time, her hands weren't trembling. By morning, everything had changed. The headmaster's office was flooded with calls from the press. Music blogs. TV networks. Even producers from Good Morning America and NPR. They didn't just want the story, they wanted her. Who was the janitor who played like a legend? Naomi declined them all. She wasn't ready to be seen that way. But she was ready to play. The Academy announced that Naomi Williams would be the closing performer for the Spring Honors Recital. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. The students? Ecstatic. The alumni? Curious. The faculty? Divided. Some, like Professor Lang and Ms. Rivera, were excited, grateful even. But Hal Bridge? He was livid. He called it a stunt. A disgrace. "We're undermining the integrity of the recital," he said at the next faculty meeting. "She's not trained. She's not credentialed. She's brilliant," Ms. Rivera snapped back. "And frankly, more moving than any of our conservatory clones. You're afraid, Leah said from the hallway, interrupting the meeting without apology. Halbridge turned. Excuse me? You're afraid of her. Because she didn't need your approval to become great. Because she doesn't care about your rules. The room went silent. Halbridge's jaw clenched. But he didn't respond. Because deep down he knew she was right. The days leading up to the recital were a blur of practice and whispered anticipation. Naomi rehearsed each night, always alone, until one evening Isabel Cho arrived. The world-renowned pianist, philanthropist, and musical prodigy in her own right walked into the auditorium wearing a gray scarf and a soft smile. I watched your video, she said. Naomi looked up, startled. Ma'am, I think you might be mistaken. I'm not. I've watched it 10 times. You don't play like someone who's trying to impress. You play like someone who's telling the truth. Naomi blinked. I haven't performed in decades. You never stopped, Isabel replied. You just went quiet. Isabel stayed that night. Not to instruct. Not to coach. But to witness. She sat on the front row as Naomi played her full piece. No hesitation, no apology. When Naomi finished, Isabel stood and clapped with tears in her eyes. That's not a recital piece, she whispered. That's a revolution. The night of the recital came quickly. The auditorium was packed. More crowded than it had ever been. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters whispered from the balcony. Alumni had flown in from New York, Chicago, even London. There were flowers in the lobby, champagne in the back, and a buzz of excitement that pulsed through the very walls. But Naomi stood behind the curtain, breath shallow, palms sweating. She wore a simple navy blue gown. Her hair was tied back in soft coils. At her collar, a single silver treble clef pin sparkled under the spotlight. Her old sneakers were gone, replaced by a modest pair of black flats. But she hadn't abandoned who she was. She was just letting herself become again. Are you ready? Leah whispered, sneaking beside her. No, Naomi said honestly. But I'll never be more ready than this. The announcer stepped forward. And now, to close our evening, a performance by a woman whose story has touched hearts around the world. Please welcome, Miss Naomi Williams. Applause rose in a tidal wave. Naomi stepped onto the stage. The lights hit her like warmth. She walked to the Steinway, Saturday, and looked out at the crowd. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She played. The first chord rang like a heartbeat. The second like breath. Then the music expanded, an explosion of color, memory, loss, and hope. Naomi's piece told a story without words. The story of a girl who once dreamed in arpeggios. A daughter who cared for a dying mother instead of chasing Juilliard. A woman who swept floors while symphony screamed inside her. Each note was a confession. Each silence a prayer. The second movement swelled with grief, eviction notices, injuries, loneliness, and long nights mopping marble. The third, rebirth. Triumph. A woman standing back up. A soul returning. By the final cadence, the audience was no longer in a concert hall. They were inside Naomi's life. She struck the last chord and let it ring. Then silence. Then eruption. Tears. Applause. Shouts of her name. Naomi stood, bowed once, and walked off stage not humbled, but home. Naomi stepped into the wings, heart pounding, the echoes of applause still vibrating through the floorboards beneath her feet. Leah met her first, eyes wet, arms open. Naomi embraced her, not like a student or a fan, but like family. You did it, Leah whispered, her voice trembling. Naomi held her close. We did. Behind them, the backstage corridor buzzed with soft chaos. Press managers, academy staff, excited students peeking through curtains. But Naomi didn't care about any of it. She didn't need validation from a headline. The music had spoken for her. The silence that followed had confirmed it. Outside, the media waited, local news, arts magazines, social media influencers. Naomi gave them only one sentence. I didn't come here to be discovered. I came to remember who I was. That night, she walked home through the quiet streets, wind brushing against her cheeks like applause made of air. She didn't feel like a janitor anymore. Not because of fame or attention, but because she had reclaimed the parts of herself long buried beneath survival. She didn't sleep. Her hands, sore from the performance, still pulsed with energy. Her mind buzzed with harmony. She sat at her small upright piano and played, not the triumphant piece from the recital, but something gentler. A melody she'd never shared. The version that carried her mother's lullabies. The one that mourned a life once lost and now reawakened. The next morning she arrived at the academy early as always. No camera crews this time. Just dawn and quiet. But the halls were different. The cleaning cart that had always waited outside the janitor's closet had been polished. A golden paper star had been taped to the handle. Not mocking, honoring. As she walked the corridor toward the auditorium, students parted like the sea. Not in pity. Not in curiosity. In respect. Some nodded. Some whispered, "Thank you." One boy even bowed slightly, awkward, heartfelt. She didn't know what to say. So she nodded in return and kept walking. When she arrived at the auditorium, the door was already open. On the stage sat a single envelope with her name written in calligraphy. Inside, an invitation. The United Nations Cultural Council cordially invites Naomi Williams to perform as a Global Artistic Laureate for Resilience and Human Spirit at the Geneva Assembly this fall. Naomi stared at the letter as if it might vanish. She read it twice. 3 times. She wasn't sure what stunned her more, that she was being honored globally, or that they called her by her name and not her job. Later that day she found herself sitting with the headmaster again. The desk looked smaller than usual. Maybe because the weight on Naomi's shoulders had lifted. Maybe because authority, once fearsome, now felt like a conversation, not a sentence. "We're renaming the main hall," the headmaster said. "With your permission." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "To what?" "The Naomi Williams Conservatory Hall." Naomi exhaled slowly. "That's not necessary." "It is. Because somewhere out there, another girl will see that name and believe she doesn't have to be anyone's shadow." Naomi didn't answer right away. Then softly, "Fine." But no speeches. Only music. The headmaster smiled. "Deal." The announcement broke the internet again. Trending tags. #Naomi Williams, #From Mop to Maestro, #Unsung Symphony. But Naomi didn't bask in the fame. She returned to what mattered most: playing, mentoring, listening. She still kept her old cleaning cart tucked in the back hall. Not because she needed to clean, but because it reminded her where she came from. And because students still confided in her more when she was holding a broom than when she stood behind a desk. One afternoon she found a note taped to the Steinway. "Dear Miss Naomi, you taught me that it's okay to be small and still be powerful. Thank you for showing me what music really means. Love, Leah." Naomi folded it carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket. That evening she didn't play her recital piece. She played Leah's. A simple melody she'd once heard hummed behind practice room doors. Unsure. Wavering. Now Naomi played it like it belonged in a cathedral. But outside Naomi's circle, not everyone was ready to celebrate. Halbridge sat in his office, the recital echoing in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't mute. The applause. The standing ovation. The cameras flashing, not for him but for her. He scrolled bitterly through the viral video. 10 million views. Then 11. Then 15. "Fleeting," he muttered. "She'll fade. She always does." But a knock on his door interrupted the delusion. Leah. She stepped inside with her music folder clutched to her chest, her chin held high. "Why are you afraid of her?" she asked. Halbridge stiffened. "I beg your pardon?" "You're scared. Not because she's not qualified, but because she's better. You haven't touched that piano in years. She became the music. And all you ever did was control it." His eyes narrowed. "You know nothing of this industry." "I know truth when I hear it," she said calmly. "And Naomi is truth." She left before he could respond. And Halbridge, for the first time in decades, had nothing to say. The days that followed felt like spring after a long winter. A hush of possibility moved through the academy, not loud, not performative, just true. Naomi didn't walk faster or speak louder, but something in the way the students looked at her shifted permanently. She was no longer background. She was foundation. The Naomi Williams Initiative launched a week after the recital. Naomi hadn't wanted a scholarship in her name, not just that. "Make it a program," she had told the headmaster. "Not just for musicians. For anyone the system doesn't see." The board approved it unanimously. Applications flooded in. From students in underfunded districts. From youth in foster care. From self-taught violinists who learned from YouTube and pianists who practiced on cardboard keys. And Naomi listened to them all. She never asked for resumes. She didn't care where you studied or if your music was technically perfect. She listened with her heart, not her credentials. One boy played an off-key rendition of Debussy's Clair de Lune. Naomi didn't flinch. She smiled. "It sounds like moonlight through fog," she said. A girl played a lullaby on a cracked plastic flute. Naomi leaned in, nodding. Did you write that? The girl blinked. Yes. Naomi touched her hand. You just painted sunlight with breath. Word spread. Naomi didn't just teach students. She believed in them. And belief, it turned out, was contagious. Formerly competitive students began leaving practice room doors open, inviting newer ones in. Sheet music was shared freely. Cadences were praised not for complexity but for honesty. The entire academy began to breathe differently. Less stiff, less prideful, more human. Halbridge, to his credit, showed up. Not with bitterness, at least not outwardly, but with silence. He stood in the back of the new initiative's first open recital. Watched as a girl with trembling hands played an original piece in front of her classmates. He didn't clap, but he listened. And for a man who had spent years talking louder than he heard, that was a start. One rainy evening, Naomi sat alone at the academy piano, humming a new melody. Not a piece from her past, not Leia's tune. Something else. Something becoming. A seed of sound not yet grown. She didn't write it down. She just felt it. The door creaked open behind her. It was Leia. Did you write that? She asked softly. Naomi nodded. Not finished yet. Leia sat beside her. It sounds like a beginning. Naomi smiled. Funny. That's what endings usually are. She reached into her coat pocket and handed Leia a folded, yellowed sheet. The original score of the piece that waited. I want you to finish the new one, Naomi said. Leia's eyes widened. Me? It's yours now. The legacy Naomi once buried had now become a gift to pass forward. She wasn't afraid to be remembered anymore. But more importantly, she wasn't afraid to let go. The next day, Naomi was summoned again to the headmaster's office. This time there was no tension in the air. Just anticipation. We received a letter, the headmaster said, placing it on the desk with reverence. From the United Nations. Naomi blinked. What now? You've been selected as a global artistic laureate for artistic resilience and social transformation. They want you to perform at the General Assembly in Geneva. This fall. Naomi stared. They'll fly you first class, the headmaster added, and put you up in a suite, with a piano. Naomi's laughter broke through the quiet like music. I've never even flown in anything but economy. Once. The headmaster's voice softened. You'll be flying for all of us now. Naomi didn't answer right away. She let the idea breathe. Finally she nodded. If it helps someone listen harder, then yes. I'll go. Back at the academy, signs began appearing in the hallways. Naomi or Maestro. From mop to master. Legacy begins in silence. Someone taped a small gold star to her cleaning card again. Naomi left it there. Not as decoration. As a monument. That week, Naomi sat quietly in the back of a student-led recital. Leia performed her new composition. It was raw, powerful, imperfect in all the right ways. Naomi recognized fragments of her own melody in the piece, but it was different now. Warmer, braver, rewritten with youth and courage. After the final note, the crowd went silent. Naomi rose, walked to the stage. She didn't clap. She said simply, "It's time we recorded that." The following morning, Leia entered a studio for the first time. Naomi sat behind the glass, headphones on, not judging, just listening. When Leia finished her final take, Naomi walked into the booth. That wasn't just music, she whispered. That was a story only you could tell. They uploaded the piece under the title, Legacy, a duet without words. Leia Carter, inspired by Naomi Williams. It exploded online. Within hours it reached 500,000 views. Within days, millions. But something more important happened too. Other students began composing pieces named for the people who lifted them, custodians, siblings, single mothers, neighbors. A movement had begun. Not with noise. With notes. Naomi's story had reached far beyond the academy walls. From Brazil to Bangladesh, from Detroit to Dublin, her name traveled not as a celebrity's but as a symbol. A reminder that genius doesn't always wear gowns or sit behind Steinways under chandeliers. Sometimes it mops floors. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes, it rises. The Naomi Williams initiative blossomed into something no one had predicted. A global collective. They called themselves the Second Verse. Retired veterans played harmonicas in veterans' homes. A grandmother in Argentina learned cello for the first time. A blind pianist in Detroit performed every weekend at a public market, bringing entire sidewalks to tears. They all said the same thing. I started again, because Naomi did. Naomi didn't call attention to any of it. She returned to her corner of the academy, her bench beside the practice wing. She still wore the same coat, still brought the same thermos, still hummed new melodies while walking the halls. And sometimes, yes, she still cleaned. Not because she had to, but because it grounded her. She was still the same Naomi, just finally seen. One frosty morning she stepped into the newly renovated hall that now bore her name, the Naomi Williams Conservatory Hall. A soft gold plaque hung beside the door. It wasn't flashy, just honest. Inside, students warmed up for the winter concert. But today was different. Today wasn't about performance. It was about memory. Naomi walked slowly to the piano at center stage. She didn't carry sheet music. She didn't announce a program. She simply sat. Then she played. Not her triumphant recital piece. Not Leia's. Not any of the compositions now bearing her name online. She played the new one, the melody that had started with a hum under rainfall, back when she believed her time had passed. Back when no one was listening. Now they were. The piece opened quietly, like someone learning to breathe again. Soft steps on linoleum. A whisper behind closed doors. A mother humming while folding laundry. Then it grew. The harmony spread like light. Like memory. Like forgiveness. It wasn't a song of revenge or glory. It was a blessing. By the final chord, every person in the room had been pulled into a single truth. Naomi hadn't come back for applause. She'd come back for every soul who still waited to be heard. That night, in her tiny apartment above the laundromat, Naomi packed her things. A modest suitcase. A new coat. Sheet music folded gently into a leather binder. Her plane left for Geneva at dawn. When she arrived, the city shimmered with glass and diplomacy. Suits and translations. Banners and briefcases. But Naomi saw only people. Hearts. The performance hall overlooked Lake Geneva. Inside, rows of diplomats, artists, and dignitaries waited for her. Some wore earbuds. Some held devices. But when Naomi walked onto the stage, they put them down. Because she didn't carry herself like an entertainer. She carried herself like a truth. Naomi sat at the grand piano, adjusted her seat, and pressed a hand to her chest, just once. Then she played. The piece was called For the Unseen. It began like breath. A single note, barely above silence. Then another. And then another. It sounded like quiet hope. Like an overlooked child tracing notes on cardboard. Like a dream folded into a janitor's pocket and carried for decades. As the piece unfolded, diplomats leaned in. Some closed their eyes. Some didn't dare blink. The music rose layer by layer. It wasn't polished in the way classical concerts often demand, but it was true. Wounded. Healing. Free. At the crescendo, her hands blurred, not from speed but from depth. Every note was a cry, a prayer, a homecoming. The silence that followed the final chord was not stillness, it was witness. And then the room erupted. Not in polite claps. In transformation. Delegates cried. Ambassadors stood. Translators forgot their jobs. Because the language Naomi spoke wasn't English or French or Spanish. It was music. And music always finds a way to be understood. That night, Naomi sat by the lake alone. She didn't think about fame or funding or the next headline. She thought about a girl who once stood beside a piano with a mop in one hand and a melody in the other, and wasn't allowed to touch the keys. And now she played for the world. Back at the academy, Naomi's return was quiet. No cameras. No fanfare. She walked through the courtyard where students now gathered daily to write, to practice, to be. One child sat at a painted garden piano. An outdoor installation in her honor. His fingers were too small to reach an octave. But he played anyway. Naomi sat beside him. "Do you like it?" he asked, not knowing who she was. She smiled. "I love it." "You looked like someone who plays," he said. "I used to," she replied gently. "Why'd you stop?" Naomi paused. Then leaned close. "So you could start." 10 years had passed. 10 full years since Naomi Williams sat under a moonlit skylight and let the world hear what silence had been holding. Since then, so much had changed. Her name was known across continents, not for scandals or spectacle, but for truth. For reminding people that art isn't born in privilege. It's born in pain, in hope, in waiting. The Naomi Williams Initiative had expanded into a global network. No longer a program, it had become a movement. Community centers in Detroit. Music labs in Ghana. Recital grants for refugee children in Greece. Everywhere the unheard were playing. Naomi had not performed publicly in years. Not because she couldn't, but because she no longer needed to be seen. She had given her stage away. Piece by piece. Hand by hand. Note by note. To the trembling fingers still learning. To the broken voices still trying. To the hidden songs waiting for someone to say, yes, that belongs too. At the academy, the recital hall buzzed with activity. A rededication was scheduled. The main performance space, once named after a long-forgotten donor, was now officially renamed, the Naomi Williams Conservatory Hall. She hadn't wanted a plaque. But she had agreed for one reason, because some girl would look up, see that name above the door and think maybe someone like me belongs here too. She had one condition, no speeches. Only music. The students arrived first. Colorful. Diverse. Dressed not in matching uniforms, but in every shade of individuality. Some had scars. Some had stories. All had music. Naomi sat at the piano before they entered. Not to practice. Not to prepare. Just to feel. Her fingers hovered over the keys, not trembling, not hesitant, just reverent. The room filled. At her signal they quieted. She didn't announce the piece. She simply played. It was soft. Slow. Not a masterpiece. Just a memory wrapped in melody. A thank you to her mother's humming. To her father's tired embrace. To the rust-colored couch where she once practiced scales. To the mop she pushed while imagining symphonies. To the silence that once tried to bury her. Now she buried it back, in song. When the last note faded, she stood without a bow. The audience didn't erupt. They listened. Because Naomi had taught them, the truest ovation is quiet understanding. Then a sound emerged. Not applause. A single piano from the back of the room. A student. Then another joined. And another. No sheet music. No cue. Just courage. Soon the entire room pulsed with layered melodies. Raw. Honest. Imperfect. Beautiful. Naomi stepped off the stage slowly, moving down the aisle as the music swelled behind her. She had never looked more powerful. Not because of applause, but because she didn't need it. Outside, under blooming trees, she found a girl composing beside the fountain. Scribbling on torn pages. Humming under her breath. Naomi sat beside her. The girl looked up. I'm trying to finish something. Let me hear, Naomi said. The girl hesitated. Then played. It wasn't precise. It was real. Naomi smiled. That sounds like truth. Later that week, Naomi was invited to curate the first episode of a new series, Unsung Keys. A spotlight for hidden artists, street performers, forgotten veterans, overlooked elders. She didn't appear in every episode. She didn't have to. Because Naomi Williams had become something more than a performer. She was now a mirror. A soft echo reminding the world that greatness doesn't shout. It whispers through time, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. And so, she did what she always had. She returned to her bench beside the practice wing. She wore her same old coat, sipped her same tea, and hummed a tune still becoming. Because music never ends. It only changes hands. And Naomi? She was no longer the janitor who wasn't allowed to touch the piano. She was the woman who taught the world to hear again. Naomi Williams was told to stay silent. To clean what others used. To never dream louder than her station. But when the moment finally came, she didn't shout. She played. And the world listened. This story reminds us that your value isn't determined by your title. It's shaped by your truth, and your willingness to share it. As Naomi said, I didn't come here to be discovered. I came to remember who I was. If this story moved you, subscribe to True Echo for more powerful, inspirational stories about redemption, resilience, and the extraordinary lives hidden in plain sight. Leave a comment below. Tell us what part of Naomi's journey spoke to you most. And share this story with someone who needs to be reminded. It is never too late to be heard.